Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dignity Rights International Reading Group. My name is Erin Daly, and I'm the Executive Director of DRI. DRI believes in the inherent and equal worth of every person everywhere, and we are dedicated to advancing dignity rights in the United States and throughout the world so that more people can live more fulfilling lives. We work through advocacy, education, and consultation on policy and litigation projects. Today, I'm delighted to see old friends and new as we launch our spring reading group series. The name reading group is something of a misnomer. It is a group and we do read, but this program is more about listening and discussing cutting-edge ideas about dignity and dignity law with scholars who are at the forefront of dignity scholarship. I'm especially happy to see some featured guests from previous reading group meetings, Catherine Dupre, who is also a DRI board member, and Stephen Riley, both of whom have published extensively in this field, and I commend their scholarship to you. Today, we are thrilled to have with us Michał Rupniewski, the author of Human Dignity and the Law, a Personalist Theory. Michał is assistant professor adjunct at the University of Łódź, Faculty of Law and Administration in the Department of Political and Legal Doctrine in Poland. He is associate at the Alexis de Tocqueville Center for Political and Legal Thought in Poland as well. He has participated in courses and stipends at the universities of Bonn, Strasbourg, and Fordham. He served as a guest lecturer at the Universidad Panamericana in Mexico City. His chief scholarly interest is political philosophy's influence on legal interpretation and legislation. In particular, he specializes in political liberalism, personalism, human dignity and law, as well as in theory of legal change. Today, he's going to talk to us about his book, Human Dignity and the Law, a Personalist Theory. Michał, welcome.
Thank you, Erin. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to have an opportunity to talk about my ideas and my book, which I feel compelled to kind of advertise now. And yes, perhaps I shall share my screen because I have a few slides for you. I hope I will just introduce the ideas in order to have a discussion rather than consume too much of of the time slot that is devoted to our meeting. So can you see the slides? Great, thanks. So just a second, because just a second, because for some reason I cannot move my slides. I'm sorry, because we have been I just cannot do it like full screen. I don't know why. So perhaps I will just go. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid
That's
I will
okay.
have. Yeah, I will just go through it without making it full screen. I'm so sorry.
That's
So
okay.
what I would like to start with is hopes and progress that, hopes that human dignity holds or brings with itself. The very idea brings quite a lot of hopes and progress that has been made. So, of course, human dignity has been widely, globally recognized as a foundational value of legal orders, especially in the post-UDHR world, legal world. And as your research, Erin, for instance, and others shows, it also brings with itself some overlapping consensus, if I may use this Rawlsian term. So courts especially show commitment to dignity in a similar way, despite fundamental differences in other respects, like different legal traditions, different religious and political backgrounds, and so on. So human dignity can be seen as a potential mediator, so to say, something, an idea or commitment that can bring genuine, respectful juridical dialogue within and across jurisdictions. And of course, as we in this group, I suppose, all are aware of, at least 2 decades have seen a growing interest and progress in understanding human dignity. I won't summarize this progress, but I suppose that now we know, we are aware of the dimensions of human dignity that were somehow not theorized well just 20 years ago. However, there are still some unresolved interpretative problems. So human dignity also brings with itself certain, perhaps even threats, or at least certain well, the possible sort of problems. First and foremost, people tend, like judges also in the formal context, judges and legislators, but especially judges, take different substantive conclusions, draw different substantive conclusions from the same commitment, right? They are applying human dignity as a legal principle, and they sometimes differ deeply about the conclusions. And especially it's especially problematic because when these differences occur, sometimes human dignity may be seen or sometimes it may work as an amplifier of conflict instead of fostering reconciliation. So from a skeptical perspective, one can say that if the flaws in your reasoning or the flaws in the decisions or in judgment refer to dignity, it's even worse, right? So the conflict becomes even more troubling if dignity is at stake. And still those interpretative problems, what to draw normatively from dignity remain. And just to see just a couple of possible conflicts and problems. On the one hand, human dignity is supposed to be equal and inherent, of course, and therefore it is not deserved, right? It's an undeserved, like everyone is entitled to dignity, to treatment with dignity, and so on. But on the other hand, when we go deeper, it seems that there must be something in human nature or in human existence or experience or somewhere which deserves the dignitarian respect. So on the one hand, it's undeserved. On the one hand, there is something that deserves respect. Also, human dignity sometimes, especially the law, when applying human dignity or legal practices, when they depict the human being, they depict it as an autonomous, free being. So an independence, it's like at the forefront. But on other occasions, human dignity, jurisprudence, and law emphasizes human vulnerability, the need for recognition or social acceptance. So in other words, it depicts the human being as dependent on others and generally vulnerable rather than independent and autonomous. So And of course, if we would go, we don't have time for it now, but if we would go to details and to specific case law, we could show how this works in practice and how different conclusions are drawn precisely because of this. So, well, in my book, I'm trying to provide another take, because I know that many takes has already been provided. I'm trying to provide another take, which perhaps could help us overcome those problems, those interpretative problems, because generally the project is motivated by a commitment to dignity, in the sense that it really is real, is substantive, and it's important. So my own take, I call it the status of personhood theory, which tries to provide resources to overcome the problems by interpreting the law and practices and jurisprudence, evoking dignity from a particular philosophical perspective, namely a personalist perspective, as provided by Polish philosophers who also were Catholic priests, Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, who later became John Paul II, and Tadeusz Styczeń. Those are the main inspirations. Well, of course, trying to summarize their philosophy in 2 or 5 minutes would be impossible. But perhaps it's important to transmit, to present the main idea. So the main idea is that the human person in action, so human being as an agent in a peculiarly human, personal way, also brings with itself, this action can be seen, human action can be seen as a sign of a special dignity or entitlement to affirmation. And what is most important and most distinctive about the personalist perspective is that the human being acts with a dynamic relation to truth. This is called vertical transcendence by Wojtyła, but the idea is that when we act, we really take adult human beings, at least, when we act, we seriously take our commitments to have claim to truth. We also, in terms of we want to, in terms of rightness, some sort of normative dimension of truth, that we really want to act on true beliefs, true principles, and so on and so forth. And what I was trying to do in this book, I just provided a map of legal uses of human dignity, and tried to interpret the law and practice with let's say, through the lenses of that conception. And what I found was a convergence between the law on the one hand and the personalist philosophy on the other, with the need for mutual sort of adjustments, in the sense that the philosophy, it's not simply a basis for, I didn't draw conclusions directly from personalist philosophy, but I rather started to look at the law, then at the philosophy, and try to all put those two in a dynamic relation. And as a result of this, provide an explication that is some sort of definition of human dignity, and explanation of its recurring presence in the law. So very shortly, the results of this interpretative procedure is my explication, or my definition, if you like, of human dignity in the law, the principles of the status of personhood, which says that before the law, each person equally must be respected as an integrated whole, radically capable of self-determination and striving towards fulfillment. So, in my view, at least, this is how the law, in a way, understands the human person. And so, in other words, this is a cosmopolitan legal principle, but this legal principle, and here also the explanation part comes in. This legal principle is not something we simply made up in a way after the Second World War, or is not something that depends only on our goodwill in a sense, but rather it's somehow an inevitable result, although implicit sometimes, and sometimes very badly realized, as we know, or pursued, but still somehow inevitable result of the, let's say, contact of human personhood as it stands and as it works on the one hand, and the law and the legal procedures, principles, and on the other. And sometimes this is its job is somehow hidden or even goes unnoticed. Sometimes it requires great efforts, and it requires also courage from judges, for example, and it urges, in the sense, to judges and legislators and other actors to see humans, to borrow a phrase from Avishai Margalit's famous book. So it keeps reminding legal actors, judges, legislators, not to fail to see that what they are really dealing with the addressees and the recipients of norms, or the parties in the courtroom, are really human beings, human persons with those special standing, which is, in a sense, even if you deny this, it will kind of show through in this way or another. And this principle is related to, or it points out to, three dignitarian interests as protected by the law. And in the book, I provide details from comparative law to as support of these claims. So those interests are freedom from degradation, self-determination, and integration and integrity. Well, freedom from degradation is, I guess, the least controversial. So in many cases, unfortunately, we know the examples from the history in which human beings were treated by other human beings as subhuman, non-human beasts, and so forth. So this was degradation, like denying all these human qualities altogether, or forgetting about them, or pretending they're not in place. That's freedom from degradation. The second interest is self-determination. It's here, my theory, I guess, is somehow most controversial potentially, because I claim that what we interchangeably sometimes call human autonomy, freedom, self-determination is best understood in terms of self-determination of the human person in the face of this dynamic relation to truth. So in other words, according to, I mean, which is in line also with Karol Wojtyła's philosophy, the human person acts and creates themselves in a way through this action, but it also means that this action is always related to human conscience and also to some objective considerations of right and wrong, true and false, and so on and so forth. So that's the self-determination part. And finally, there is integration or integrity, which is the special way in which on different levels of the human personhood, human being or human person is an integrated whole, is not even at the bodily level, which we call bodily integrity, but also at the social level or even at the moral level, the human being strives towards certain integrity or integration. And this means that this dignitarian commitment or dignitarian protection never or rarely is related to only one of those three. Also, those three it's not an exclusive list. We could think of different options, but I think those are kind of focal, central. So whenever we try to protect a human person in the dignitarian sense, it's always this triad, or at least a number of a dynamic set of dignitarian interests, which is kind of at play. And that's why it sometimes may cause differences. It may cause, well, shortly, problems. So I distinguish between two different ways that the law can protect or be committed to this principle, can pursue this principle. One is basic dignitarian protection, when in cases in which the dignitarian status or standing has been denied altogether, and therefore it must be also preserved, like restored in a way, or at least, well, it's been denied and we need to reclaim it. It shouldn't be conflated with creating the status, because I claim that the status is independent from social recognition, but still we need to reclaim that status in this basic way. And that is why, for instance, it's important to criminalize and judge war crime. But the more practically problematic way is the specific dignitarian protection, in which sometimes there are tensions between all those three. For instance, self-determination, choosing your way, being a master of your own life, fate, and so on, can sometimes be in some form of tension with your integrity, for instance, or with your, even sometimes in extreme cases, in freedom from degradation, and so on and so forth. So here we need to find some equilibrium, but I believe that when these three and the principle itself is made explicit, our legal interpretation of a particular case and particular facts can be principled, self-restricted in a sense, but also informative. And these are the main, let's say, ideas that I wanted to share with you. Thanks for your attention. Here is my email if you would like to continue on email. And this is my Twitter account, which is the only social media I have. And yeah, thank you very much. I shall now, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. If you can unshare your screen, and then we can sort of come back as a group. If people are comfortable putting their cameras on, that would be great. If not, that's okay too. Let me invite any questions on Michal's behalf. If anybody has questions or comments that they'd like to begin the conversation with. Stephen.
Hi all, and Michał, thanks so much for that presentation. That was I've heard bits of this before, and I've read bits of it before, and I stand by my judgment that it's a really excellent book and a really excellent account, and I can never hear enough about it. I mean, I'm going to say something positive, and then I might try and ask an awkward or sticky question just to liven, just to be a contrarian, I suppose. Look, one of the great things about this, many great things about this book, is that it overcomes one or two major ruptures, I think, in the literature. One is the lack of dialogue between religious accounts and non-religious accounts of the functioning of dignity, a kind of the sanctity reading on the one hand and the autonomy reading on the other. And I think you show ways in which they could be reconciled. I think related to that, you also give us the resources to understand the temptations to treat dignity as a set of objective goods, in a sense, objective interests in the sense that we might find in finis, and as it were, also the more liberal understanding of dignity is related closely to autonomy and self-determination. I think you really show us how those might be properly and satisfactorily reconciled at a philosophical and indeed a legal level. I think my awkward question is this, and I think I would level this at you and at Dworkin. So I think you're probably in good company. In terms of your three, your triadic account of dignitarian interests, you have integrity / integration. Is that correct? I think. And I wonder if there's almost a revealing tension between those two terms anyway. I mean, in a sense that on the one hand, there's the idea of self-determination and giving shape to one's life and being able to give shape to one's character. And on the other, there's a certain kind of self-regarding duty to have integrity, to not do things that will diminish your own dignity. And I think there's a kind of possible internal tension there between, as it were, other regarding duties and self-regarding duties potentially. So I'll throw that out there. I'm not treating this as a problem with a capital P, but I think there's perhaps some interesting wrinkles that we could explore there.
Yes, thank you. Should I respond right away, or I should collect questions, or what's the procedure?
Whatever you'd like. If anybody has any related questions, maybe I would invite that. And otherwise, why don't you go ahead and respond to what Stephen was bringing up? Go ahead.
All right. So I will, thank you. So I'm gonna respond to Steve. Thank you, Steve, for your question and also for the kind words. I really do believe that these sometimes it's overemphasized. I like this expression of Karl Popper, the myth of the framework. Sometimes I think we tend to think too much in terms of, oh, so now you're using the, I don't know, Catholic framework, and you're using liberal framework, and we kind of fall in this false, I think, impression that the genuine dialogue and coming to terms with the differences is impossible. I believe it really is, and dignity is really the principle that should guide it. But of course, it doesn't mean that the problems do not appear. So with regards, but was your question more about integrity versus self-determination, or integration versus integrity?
Yeah, the latter, I think.
The last one.
Yeah.
Because, well, here in Wojtyła's philosophy, he doesn't speak of integrity that much. He speaks rather of integration. He believes that human person is integrating themselves while acting. So it's not integrity in the moral sense, because I suppose that this integrity in the Dworkinian terms is mostly a moral normative idea, isn't it, right? You should have integrity. But for Wojtyła, for instance, it's more a descriptive sort of a claim, a phenomenological claim of a person. He says that if you act accordingly to your, so if you not only exercising your so-called freedom to choose, basically, right? You're not only making choices, which is important, but also do it in the principled way, in the sense that you know what is true, what's not true, you're trying to figure out what's right, what's not right. Then what comes with the action is the integration of the person. That's what Wojtyła says. So if you act otherwise, meaning, for instance, you act and say whatever is, I don't know, beneficial in the short term, you're not only using integrity in the moral sense, which Wojtyła doesn't really speak too much about, but you lose integration in this phenomenological sort of, in a sense, personal, maybe psychological sense, right? Because you're kind of starting to disintegrate, to kind of fall apart. So he believed that truly evil persons, people who, act against their own, in fact, because being evil for him means also like acting against your knowledge about others, knowledge about morality. They also fall into despair, and they kind of lose their integration. They kind of are somehow disappearing, in a sense, in very metaphorical sense. So here I think this so maybe it's more integrated in my account, because I kind of follow Wojtyła more or less. So it's more integration than integrity, in the sense that the law should respect, and I think it really does respect, the special integration that follows action and follows choices. I don't know if it's helpful in any sense, but on the other hand, I must admit that this allows some forms of, this is a little bit of a bad word, but it allows some forms of paternalism, in a sense, because, but here I argue in the book that we should be kind of careful, and for especially judges, for instance, and generally, so what they should be kind of care about is the integration or integrity of status, or equality of status, rather than fostering integration or integrity as simply defending the moral or good ways of life. That's the difference. But okay, yeah.
That's fantastic. That was very, very clear. I'll hand over to Catherine, because I think she might want to come in on this question. But thank you.
I just want to jump in before Catherine speaks, but just to say thank you for that question, but also, Michał, the concepts you're talking about are so complicated, and I really appreciate your talking about them in ways that non-philosophers can understand and appreciate and access. So thank you, Catherine.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Michał, for your presentation. My question comes from someone who is not trained as a philosopher and certainly not as a theologian. And I'm a legal scholar and I work on human rights. And you may know that I have developed a theory of dignity that is a secular theory, so deliberately non-religious, so that it can accommodate all sorts of religious views in Europe, but around the world as well. So this is where I come from. And so I was a little bit surprised by your qualification of Pope John Paul II as a philosopher, and your choice of his position on human dignity and generally his personalist philosophy that you call personalist philosophy, for a basis, or as a basis for your philosophical thinking on the role of human dignity, let's say, in human rights case law in Europe. This is what I understand you're also looking at. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about why you decided to choose Wojtyła amongst all the possible philosophers to anchor your own philosophy, especially today in Europe, and especially today in Poland. And so if I may have a follow-up question on that, you probably won't be surprised by it. I just would like to know if you could elaborate a little bit on how your own philosophical construction of human dignity, anchored in Wojtyła's philosophy, as you call it, how does it affect, or how do you use it to make sense of the development in Poland, which amount to denying women's dignity in the way you define them? These three really important dignitarian interests, freedom from degradation, from self-determination, integration and integrity, by denying them the right to abortion in such a drastic and absolute manner. So I just was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit and share your thoughts on this. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Well, with regards to the Pope question, so to say, well, really, I'm not, well, my presentation was short and it didn't provide references, so that might have been misleading, but I am, in my theory, in developing this personalist theory, I'm developing a philosophical account. It's not really an ecclesiastic, it's not a Catholic account in the sense of part of the church social teaching. Well, I'm perfectly comfortable with that, by the way, but I'm just working in a little bit of a different field, in the field of philosophy proper, and therefore I used mostly, or I interpreted the law, as I told you in the presentation, with the lens of Wojtyła's book, Person and Act, or Person and Action, which is, well, I wouldn't say it's a secular book, of course, in the strong sense of secularism, but it's not a book it's a phenomenology of personhood and of human action, which is done by, which is done from phenomenological perspective, looking, observing how the person acts, and so on and so forth. So that is why, that's partly because that is partly motivated also by the hope to provide sources for genuine dialogue. But also, again, I'm using Popper again, sorry for that, but this myth of the framework, right? We should, I believe, regard certain philosophical ideas simply as true or not, or as misguided or not, not as part of some framework. However, in terms of the theory of the acting person, it's simply a philosophical idea in the strict sense, not ecclesiastical conception, right? It's not. So that's the sort of the Pope question. Now the abortion question, because it's the hard question, that's true. Also because I think, unfortunately, it's really hard to find good solutions here, because I provide evidence. I mean, I provide an interpretation of Roe versus Wade, for instance, in the United States, showing that the justification of the judgment, whatever we might think of the abortion law regime, that is the best one, but the justification itself was defective, in a sense. It didn't really take into consideration the equal dignity of all human beings. So I think abortion is a really hard case, and I think that whatever solutions are provided, they really should take into account the equality of status. I'm not saying, well, it's maybe a metaphysical claim rather than strictly philosophical, legal claim, whether fetus, for instance, is equal in dignity, but at least it should be taken, this possibility that the unborn life is a human life, it should be taken into account. But on the other hand, and equally important, is the dignity and integration and everything that I talk about the people who are supposed to make choices, especially the women, right? So again, I'm not saying that there are easy reconciliations here, but what I'm saying is that yes, looking for the solution should really take seriously all standpoints. Also, because if we understand human dignity, like this self-determination part, right? If we understand this, if we take this seriously, and we take people who, I don't know, advance claims in the public square as genuinely thinking about them as really true or false, then we should take this commitment to truth that people in the public square are showing seriously. And even if they're completely disagreeing, right? So I'm not saying that it's a very easy thing to do, but what I urge is to consider these options seriously, even from a it's not certainly a religious perspective. It's just dignitarian perspective. In my view, I understand that it might be hard to accept, perhaps, but that's what I think. Now, the developments in Poland, personally, I believe there has been there was a mistake, but it's more like a Polish sort of. I would need to provide a detailed account of what I think about political and legal problems or developments in Poland. But in short, if the nullum crimen sine lege principle is valid, then you shouldn't change the criminal law through a judgment of a court. But it's the only thing I can say now. All right, thank you. I hope it was somehow helpful, or at least understandable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for elaborating and explaining further. Thanks.
Thanks. Andrew.
Hello. Very interesting talk, Michał. Haven't read the book, but I found the talk very interesting. Aaron, thank you again for inviting me to participate. I think I participated a year ago or something and missed a few of the others in the interim for one reason or another, but I'm very happy to join this discussion. I have sort of a, dare I say, philosophical question, but before, I mean, I was intrigued, however, by the response regarding abortion, and it really does seem to me that this is an important issue for your position, particularly for a position that emphasizes personhood. I mean that is the fetus a person in your view? You only refer to the fetus as human life, and you know, even people who are in favor of abortion, or well, that you know, it's one thing to talk. We can talk about human life and still not talk about personhood. And again, if you link personhood to action, it makes even more interesting the question of this personhood status of the fetus. But that's a different matter. I'm sure there's other thoughts. Other people have further thoughts on that. But mine was more, I was intrigued by your comments at the outset, the distinction at the outset you made between dignity focused on deserved and undeserved considerations. And I mean, I interpret that in one sense as simply saying that you know, undeserved means that we have we can claim dignity simply in virtue of our status as human beings. I mean, I'm not sure that's how you were interpreting it, but I think that's how it's sometimes interpreted. Whereas deserved means it's earned. It's a function of maybe a membership in a political community where dignity is recognized. You know, so just listening to your talk, I was never really clear where you came down on that, or I think that maybe you were trying to conjoin them, which would be great. You know, that's an aspiration of a lot of us, but it wasn't clear how you were doing that. And in fact, the very claimed status of personhood left that itself. Again, I haven't read the book, so I'm sure you've addressed this in great detail, but, you know, are we talking about personhood as a status? Or is it personhood simply as a status we have already as persons? And then, you know, related to that, you talked about the cosmopolitan view, but that itself could mean a lot of things. Is it cosmopolitan in the sense of natural law theory, or is it cosmopolitan in the sense of a, you know, global political community? So, you know, it keeps on coming back to whether it's earned or unearned, or deserved or undeserved. And, you know, so I guess my question is, or was never clear how you came down on that in the end. I mean, I think a lot rides on, you know, unless you can combine the two, a lot rides on which side you're going to take in that matter. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for this inspiring question. Well, in short, I'm on the undeserved side. So ultimately, it's undeserved, and but also maybe the word deserved, it's not the best one, because it kind of, I'm sorry, it kind of blurs the picture. Perhaps conferred and unconferred would be the better, right? So I'm on the unconferred side, which is, I understand that it can be seen as a contradiction to the status theory, right? Because status is normally it's converged, isn't it? Right? So I am on, my view says that this status of person is not converged, not conferred, conferred. I missed the word. Not conferred by society recognition, but it's also not earned by your action, for example, it's rather an axiom of the public order. That's what I call it. I didn't want to go into details because it's kind of complicated, what public order means and so on and so forth. But in short, I think human dignity is some sort of a axiom of a public order, and therefore it is not earned, not deserved, and not conferred, but rather recognized, inherent, and so on and so forth. Now, that also means that a lot of, I think, especially in bioethics, a lot of discourse is, I think, done in the how should I put it? It's wrong-headed in a way, because sometimes when we discuss about hard cases, we almost try to be advocates of some human individuals that are, I don't know, in the terminal state or something like that. We kind of, it's almost like we need to justify that they deserve dignitarian protection, for instance. While in case of healthy, normal adult people, we don't do it, right? We rather assume that they have this status, and we're making claims because of that. And therefore, I think those highly dependent human individuals should also be regarded as persons covered by the principle, basically. So action, in other words, action is something that may help us explain what dignity is about, but it's not something that justifies our dignitarian commitment in the strong way of justification. It's not something you need to show in order to have this dignitarian protection. So in this sense, the status of personhood is an axiom of some sort, because undermining it in one case kind of ruins the whole, because it's inconsistent to claim it in other cases. So you need to ascribe it widely. But also, the other problem that I have with this, it's nevertheless, sometimes you can have duties that come out of your dignity, right? So I think the answer is the integration, sort of. Integration of status. Like, if the status should be really meaningful as an axiom, not as a product of society, then it should be maintained also by the individuals in different regards. But again, here the law should be careful not to impose too much on individuals and leave them the space for self-determination. So it's not very easy practically to achieve, but basically that's what I'm kind of trying to do.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. Eileen, if you'd like to ask your question.
Sure. I'll just throw this out while I'm listening to the abortion discussion. And I went back and I looked at Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is the follow-up decision to Roe. And I just, in that case, Justice Kennedy talks, about dignity and about personhood and about what it means to be a person, and that decisions, of this sort are sort of integral to being a person, and that they're trying to strike a different sort of balance that Roe did. I just throw that out there. I just wondered if anybody had any reaction.
Michał, you get first stab at the answer.
Well, honestly, I don't know. I think that's I already kind of expressed a possible answer to that. I mean, it's really hard to find equilibrium between personal views and the equal protection of dignity sometimes, but we should seek some forms of equilibrium, and the institutional order should also try to accommodate that. Well, that's all I can say. I guess it's not very informative, but
As the U.S. constitutionalist in this group, I'll just thank you, Eileen, for raising the case of Casey versus Planned Parenthood versus Casey, because it is one of the few cases where the court talks about dignity, and the only one where it talks about dignity in the context of abortion. And it does, I think, talk about dignity very much in ways that are very much aligned with what Michał has been talking about, this integrated approach, and this sort of notion of self-determination and striving towards self-fulfillment in that language that you use, I think is very much aligned to one of the directions that the court might have gone in, to protect personal rights, including but not limited to abortion, not just that. And of course, we know from Dobbs that that's not the direction the court has gone in most recently. But that's a discussion for another day, I'm sure. I think your presentation of these ideas that are so complex and comprehensive in your book, and your ability to sort of distill them for us to just get the gist of it, I think is just wonderful. You've just done a really terrific job of introducing us to these ideas and really doing what this reading group is meant to do, which is provoke thought and discussion about complex issues around dignity as applied in everyday life. So I think I really commend you and thank you for your contribution here. If I could just ask people to unmute themselves just for a moment so that we can give Michał a round of applause that he can actually hear. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been a true pleasure having you here. It's been a great pleasure to seeing everybody else and to having this great discussion, which could, of course, go on. There's much more to be said. I just want to invite you all back on May 5th, when we'll be hearing from Vincent Lloyd talking about Black dignity and issues around race in the United States. And then on June 22nd, we'll be hearing from Pablo Gilabert on social dignity and social justice issues, particularly around labor issues. So thank you very much, Michał. Thank you to everybody for joining today, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great to be here. Thanks for your questions. Thanks.